I thought I would create a brief podcast to give you some additional clarification on Assessment Task 2. It might help answer some of the questions that have been appearing on the discussion forum. Just to start off with, the idea behind this assessment task is for you to design or construct and implement a sequence of lesson plans. These lesson plans need to support the learning of students in your classroom. Depending upon how you're going and what the setting is in which you are teaching, this may be a small group of students or it may be the whole classroom. For the secondary pre-service teachers, it's likely to be the whole class. However, in your planning and documentation and in your implementation of the sequence of lesson plans, you need to be targeting this at the learning needs of the students in your classroom. So that's an important point to learn. And that links back to the activities that we did in Connected Classrooms in week 1, where we talked about learner biographies. Some of you will have created some learner biographies on a couple of students in your classroom. Hopefully, you'll be able to annotate your lesson plans to identify how you are meeting the needs of those particular learners. If, for example, in the secondary classroom, you've not been able to construct that learner biography, I would still be expecting you to be able to identify the learning needs of the students in your classroom and how your lessons are meeting those particular learning needs. So remember, when we talked about lesson planning, the starting point is what your students need, where they are at. So if you're a little bit shaky on that, revisit the ideas around the learner biographies that come from week 1 of this course and that were also discussed in Introduction to Educational Settings. Another important element of your lesson plans is that they utilise appropriate educational technologies and ICT resources. Now, some of you I've spoken to personally about your concerns that the school in which you are placed or the specific classroom in which you are placed has limited access to technology. It may also be that you are not being given any scope within the lesson plan to deviate from the plans that your mentor has already developed, and therefore your capacity to integrate appropriate educational technologies is somewhat constrained. As I've said to those students, don't panic. We expect you to work within the constraints or the opportunities that your classroom provides. If you're in a school where you've got great access to technology, hey, that's a bonus. If you're in a school where your technology options are very limited, work within the constraints that the school is imposing upon you. Where you get around this for your assignment is in the second part of the assignment, which is your justification for what you have been able to do and the choices around technology and lesson sequencing that you've been able to make. So here's this. You're constructing a justification of the reasoning and theoretical underpinning of your use of technology in this sequence. So here's what we want you to do, and this is where, for me, the crux of the assignment is. It's in the defense of the choices that you've made around how you've sequenced the planned learning experiences. How have these learning experiences linked to the learning needs of the students that you are teaching, whether that's all the students in your class, whether that's a small group, or whether it's a 1 or 2 individuals that you've been able to construct a learner biography for. What are some of the learning theory considerations that you've thought about? Have you been able to think about a more student-centred approach, collaborative learning approach? Have you thought about the questioning that you might have incorporated into your lesson? What are some of the underpinning justifications for the approach that you've been taking. Here you might link back to something from your method or something from the discipline that your particular lessons are related to. So literacy or numeracy or science, etc. Back to the ICT things, we want you to talk briefly about the safety and ethical considerations that you've made when you've been doing your planning. Throughout the reflection, what are the things that you've learned and the professional learning needs that you've identified from this activity? Think back to the specific goals that you set yourself for this placement that we went through in weeks 4, and then in week 5 we revisited those. What experiences have you had that have helped you to meet those goals in this sequence of 3 lessons? What additional goals might have popped up as a result of your experiences in these 3 lessons? So, in a sense, there are 2 main parts to this criteria. One is the sequence of the 3 lessons. And what we're looking for here are some innovation, originality and creativity of the lessons. If you've been given lessons to deliver and you've had limited opportunity to adapt, change or design those lessons from the start, we understand that that's quite a common occurrence within schools. So talk a little bit about what those constraints have been. We'll also be looking at the extent to which the ICT integration is authentic and meaningful. Here is where we are looking for the extent to which you have been able to progress along the SAMAR model. That was one of the online lectures that I posted around week 2 or week 3. To what extent have you been able to move beyond substitution of existing ways of teaching to really modify or reinvent how learning and teaching might happen in a classroom, enhanced with the use of technology? Again, if you've been unable to move beyond simple substitution because that's what your mentor has directed you to do, then explain that to us in the justification of your lesson planning sequence, or add some annotations to your lesson plan that might highlight how you would have preferred to have made use of technology, so that it's clear to us where you're acting out of constraint by your school and by your mentor, and where the ideas for being more creative and original and for moving along that continuum of IC integration are yours. We'll be looking also at how logical your sequencing is, whether it makes sense to us that that seems to be a reasonable way to move through the sequence of your lessons. The fit with the learning and teaching philosophy, this is something that you might annotate as to justifying why you've taken the particular approach that you have been that you've taken in your sequence. We're going to be looking at the sorts of pedagogical approaches, the learning and teaching activities that you have designed into your lesson. We're particularly looking at the reflections on student learning. That's the end section of each of those lesson plans, and we expect you to be filling those in. We're also looking at how the evidence of the students' learning that you've reflected upon, and hopefully that you have collected some evidence of, is informing your sequencing. As discussed when I think about week 4, when I gave you some online resources around lesson sequencing, our sequences often don't play out in reality the way they play out in our head when we originally plan them. Students will sometimes not grasp the concepts we're trying to teach as quickly as we think they might. Conversely, they might grasp them a whole lot faster than we had originally planned. In either case, we then need to adapt the next lesson in our sequence to take into account what has been learnt, not what we thought might be learnt. So you need to be looking at the evidence of what the students have actually learnt and completed and mastered, what skill they've developed, what understandings they've generated, that informs the next part of your sequence. So we'd be expecting to see some annotations around that on your lesson plans. The second part of the lesson of the assignment is the justification. Now, many of you asked about word count. In my view, you have to write your lesson plans anyway. Your mentors will have expected to have seen your lesson plans ahead of time. We've instructed you prior to you going out to placement to use the lesson planning template that's provided on the Connected Classrooms website from week 2, and it's also in the Introduction to Educational Settings course website. So I kind of figure those are words that you have already had to have done. So it means that you have more words to spend on your justification, and if you wanted to annotate your lesson plans, then those are the words that I'll be counting. For those who I haven't taught before, I'm not a stickler for word counts. If you write well and succinctly and convey your thoughts in a cogent manner, then the word count is not important. So unless I'm not after 10,000 words or even 5,000 words, but 2,000, 2,500, I'm not going to quibble over that as long as they are good words. So what we're looking for in the justification is really a reflection on your own learning about teaching and integration ICT, particularly your ability to identify implications for your own teaching practice and professional learning needs. Why did you choose the ICT integration that you chose? Why did you choose to change the sequence or adapt the sequence? What was it about the student learning that informed your choices? What was it in the learner biographies or in the learning needs of the students in your teaching group that has informed your choices around your sequence? Here in the justification is where you can explain, but briefly, the constraints under which you have been asked to operate as a teacher, whether you've had to use pre-existing plans and have been unable to deviate from them, whether your school and your classroom in particular has very limited access to technology, whether your mentor has not wanted to relinquish that control to you to be more innovative. Here in the justification is where you can talk about those sorts of things. And in one of the recent discussion forum posts, I put up some suggested subheadings for those who are looking for more guidance on structure. But I have to say, I'm not one for prescribing how you defend your choices and how you write about those choices. And here's where you need to look at the criteria sheet and self-assess whether you believe that you've met all of the criteria. Remember that this justification is looking for links to theory, and that we're expecting by this semester particularly that you have mastered the APA 6th style. If you are confused about that, every university library in Australia, particularly the education department, every university library in Australia will have a referencing guide that looks at APA 6th. Just copy the protocols and formats from those and you'll be right. And of course, your written expression, grammar and punctuation are always important in your written assignments. I'm hoping that that discussion helps you a little bit more. One other question people have asked about the learner biography. They're not included in the word count. I'm suspecting that some of the secondary students in particular may not have been in a position to construct that learner biography. If you have, that's fantastic. You'll be able to make really clear links in your justification for your lesson plan sequence to the data in those learner biographies and help justify why you've planned the sequence of activities in the way that you've planned them. If you haven't been able to do a learner biography, I would expect you to be putting in an appendix some evidence of the needs of the learners that you are teaching in your classroom. And you'll just have to make the best of that evidence. Again, the learner biography or the evidence that you're talking about need to be put into an appendix. They're not part of the word count for the assignment itself. You'll find a place to submit your assessment task to in the assessment task 2 folder on the course Blackboard. Bye for now.